Welcome, Jared. Welcome to the bottom line.
Hey, thank you.
It's not every day that a South African gets to sit across the table from a Kiwi, which is a New Zealander for the Americans. And there's a lot of love between those two nations. The Aussies, though,
Yeah. And they're two different countries for all the Americans.
It's love-hate with the Aussies.
That's it. Yeah.
But we still want them. It's not like you don't want them. And this is all sports related, by the way. But no, it's amazing. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I want to dive into some interesting conversation, I think. We were connected through a great friend, Fabiano Altamora, which that's a whole nother story. There's another foreigner in America doing some amazing things. But you're just traveling through. You're a journeyman 5 weeks through America, so we snagged you here, and I'm going to have some fun with an interview here.
Yeah, come on. Let's go.
Yeah. So with a backdrop just a little bit, born and raised as a New Zealander.
That's right.
Northern Ireland. For those people that don't know, there is quite a difference between the Northern and the Southern Island.
So I'm actually from the Southern Island.
You are?
But I do a lot of work in the Northern Island.
Okay, where were you born?
So I was born in Christchurch, New Zealand.
Yeah, which is,
Center of the Southern Island.
Southern Island is so beautiful.
Yeah.
For Americans, when you think of New Zealand, you think of Lord of the Rings. And that's where Lord of the Rings was filmed, on the Southern Island, where Peter and his group lived there for years. And it's so gorgeous, stunning. Not that the North is not, but the Southern Island is different.
The North Island is pretty, but the South Island is majestic.
Yeah. The grandscape of it, it's just epic. And it's not as populous. It's not as populated as the North. Yeah. A lot of areas that is, more natural terrain. Yeah, so it's good. Beautiful. Okay. When did you get involved in documentary filmmaking? How did that happen? Was that a school thing?
Yeah, so basically I remember right back I wanted to be a marine biologist as a child.
Okay.
And then when I was 12, I borrowed my grandfather's camcorder so I could go film some fish. And then as I was filming the fish, I became more in love with the idea of filming things than the things I was actually wanting to study. And from then I was just hooked with cameras, went through film school, did all of those things, had the classic job waiting as a restaurant, waiter for a year. Then I got my first job in a small production house, directing, producing, and editing.
In New Zealand?
In New Zealand.
Yeah.
So I did that for about 5 years, making documentaries. And I was loving that until one day God spoke to me very dramatically and called me to lay that all down for a season and become a pastor. And so then my life did a big change, and I went to Bible college, became a children's pastor, then a youth pastor, and then an assistant pastor. And I was progressing through that the whole time going, I really enjoy this, but my heart is to be making films and documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And about 8 years into that journey, I had a dream where God met me in the dream. And I'd been daydreaming about wanting to make a documentary, just something that would showcase the world, something awesome with a facet of Jesus running through it. And he met me in the dream and said, Jared, I don't want you to make a documentary about me. I want you to make hundreds of them. Mm-hmm. And so I need you to get back into the industry, build a team, launch your own platform, and get going.
Yeah.
And so, I woke up from the dream at 11 at night, sat bolt upright in bed. I was pretty much hyperventilating because the experience was so shocking. And I thought it would happen overnight, but I actually went into about an 18-month period of God just speaking to me, and then he finally released me from pastoring. And so I resigned. My wife resigned. We'd been on staff at the church at that point for about 10 years, and we launched Fantail Studios and began to recruit people that were just desperate to create things of significance. People that had gone through film school and 10 years later, they're just stuck doing, nice wedding videos or, television commercials or things like that.
Yeah.
So, and they're, why don't you guys quit your jobs and let's have an adventure with God and begin to tell stories that we actually really care about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're doing.
Now I'm going to jump because and that's amazing. What's your wife's name?
Roanna.
We'll meet Roanna maybe in New Zealand.
Yeah, come on.
Maybe we'll come see the Kiwis. I want to jump to media as a ministry, which is amazing, using film to tell stories to move culture forward. I mean, our production house, it's transforming culture through uplifting entertainment. That's literally the vision. But for you, we fight sex trafficking, which is a dark world. What I found fascinating was with you, though, a lot of the documentary work was in the world of gangs.
Yeah, which was not intentional.
So I want to know how did that, because that's not, it's sitting there, I'm going to make a documentary. I'm going to go from shooting fish to we're gonna make a documentary on gangs, which I'm so thankful that you did. But I think these two worlds collide because everything we do in fighting sex trafficking, there's gang element every single day. We talk about the U.S.-Mexico border. There's gang every single day. And there's these factions. And we're going to pull some of them up and we're going to discuss some of it. But how the first documentary about a gang, who was the gang, and how did that come about?
So the first person, it was a man called Lucky Takuha. And so he was a Maori man, which is
a Maori, a native.
Yeah, the indigenous people.
Indigenous.
And so I heard about him, and all I knew was that he had been a gang member 3 years prior, been in gangs his entire life. He was in his mid to late 40s. And now he had become just totally transformed and was studying to become a pastor. With 3 years, something happened.
So you heard of that story?
I heard the story, but I had no idea what.
But he was known, right?
Yeah, he was
kind of a little bit nationally as a gang.
He was known in the gang world.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea of who he was because I had.
But in the gang world, he was a big deal.
He was a big deal. He was infamous.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed him. Very simple, 3 cameras, 45-minute interview. We edited it down to 6 minutes and just got the nucleus of his story, which was a man who had been suicidal most of his life, a drug addict most of his life, beaten by his father most of his life, hated the police most of his life, been in prison most of his life. Now, you get the picture. And he got arrested by a police officer, but the policeman treated him with so much dignity and respect that it kind of threw him. And he's been arrested hundreds of times. They brought him in for questioning. They released him later that night. And, he was just thought, well, that guy confused me because he spoke to me with kindness. He said, I don't want to put handcuffs on you in front of your wife. Let's just go do this quietly. This guy who was he had just started stepping back from the gang world because he needed to work on his mental and emotional well-being. So he was having a break. And he ended up going to church because an old surfing buddy had invited him and he couldn't think of a reason to say no. And he said yes and then got trapped. I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? Goes to church, but the policeman that had arrested him the night before walked into the church.
Come on.
And so he goes, oh, this guy's a Christian. And the policeman looked at him. Long story short, the policeman begins crying because he's got so much compassion for this gang member. And the gang member, Lucky, says to his wife, I think I'm having a heart attack, because he couldn't understand what it was that he was feeling because he had never felt empathy before in his life. At the end of the service, the policeman is talking to the gang member and says, hey, can I pray for you? And Lucky says, sure. He had no idea what that meant. The policeman gets 3 of his friends who are all policemen. They stand around this man who has been at war with the police his entire life. They pray for him, and he gets delivered in that moment from all of this anger and hatred that has been intrinsic into who he was. It was his identity. And in that moment, he got suddenly set free. And so we made this video, and I said to Lucky, 6 minutes, we just started our ministry. It was a testimony video amongst, I think, 15 that I'd filmed that week. I said, could I put your cell phone number with the video? I'm going to release it on Facebook. And when we won't put ad spend behind it, I have no idea if people are going to see this or not. We're a brand new ministry. But if people watch it, and especially people that are in the gang world, they don't want to talk to me. No one knows who I am, but people know you. And so we put his testimony out. Within a week, he'd had over 100 phone calls and messages of people wanting help.
From within the gang world?
From within the gang world, or families within the gang world, that whole sector. And then the video went viral and started playing not just in gang pads around the country, but it also played to the head of our country's police. And they invited Lucky to come as a guest speaker to a police conference to talk about what had happened, that transformational moment. Someone who'd gone through all the systems and all the programs with no change, how a moment with the policeman who had arrested him, praying for him, changed his life.
Yeah, and that is the power of media. When when used for a purpose, but it's equally powerful when it's used for evil, and it can destroy lives. I want to pause there for a second, and Rebecca, if you don't mind, let's pull up. Let's start with the world's most dangerous gangs before we go there, because I want to challenge people a little bit in this show today, Jared. I want to challenge them. So, but before we do, I just want to thank Patriot Mobile. Thank you guys, Glenn Story and the guys at Patriot Mobile, for supporting the show, for bringing the bottom line to the audience. Thanks for the work you do at Patriot Mobile, for going to the border and fighting to defeat sex trafficking and rescue children and save children. If you are thinking of getting a new cell phone service or a new phone, check out Patriot Mobile. It's the only Christian conservative cell phone network in the United States. They use all the major towers, great service, even better customer service. But most importantly, when you spend money on your cell phone bill with Patriot Mobile, you know that your money is not going to be reverse engineered to Planned Parenthood, to fund abortions and things that you do not agree with. So check out Patriot Mobile, dial 972-PATRIOT, mention the bottom line, which is where you are, and you'll get a free activation if you're a service member. Thank you so much for your service in this country. They're going to take especially good care of you. If you go online, just mention online in the captions that you're from the bottom line, and they're going to take very good care of you. Jared, I want to pull some things up, and I want the audience to see this, because I wanted to start with that story before we showed individuals, because I want to break the stigma, break the status quo. Just like in sex trafficking, people go, oh, okay, I know, I think I know what a pimp looks like. And I said, well, because you watch Terrence Howard in Hustle and Flow. Yeah. Mink coat, Cadillac, gold tooth, that's not a pimp today. Well, I think I know what trafficking is because you watch Taken, and a girl gets kidnapped in France. It's not trafficking today. I think I know what a gang member looks like, and I think I know what their worth is. And I go, no, you just heard Lucky's story. If somebody will take a minute to, as Christ did, invest in another human being, and that investment may be a hello. It may be, let me not handcuff you in front of your wife. Yeah. Let's do this and restore your dignity in front of your family or your children. Let me pray over you. Let me just be kind. We can transform. Any life can transform. Yeah, any life. So let's look on screen here. On people, most dangerous gangs of all time. MS-13 still ranks number 1. Now, if we go back, if you go to Franklin, Tennessee, and you drive from Nashville to Franklin, all my Nashville people, my Franklin people, my family, and it's called The Castle. It's just known as The Castle. You drive from Nashville to Franklin, you cut over, and you drive past Al Capone's castle. Right. Okay? And it was a hideout, because he's a Chicago boy, and he was up in the north, but he would go to this area because it's beautiful to go hide. So many stories, Al Capone's castle. You consider Capone. You can consider all the guys from the Sicilian gangs. So I don't know, is MS-13 really the most dangerous ever? But I'll tell you, we know MS-13, and we know what they do on the Mexico border. We know what they do inside Mexico, and they're considered accordingly the most dangerous because of the brutal, savage nature of these people. And I want your opinion, now having interviewed and having dived into many gangs. What happens to a human being to be able to commit acts like MS-13? I'll tell you, we're talking about skinning people. Right. We're talking about, and then I'll argue, just to be honest, some of the violent murders in South Africa on white farmers are not necessarily done by a particular gang, but I don't think MS-13 has anything on that black magic, dark, demonic African spirit, where we're talking about some of the most egregious. If you have children listening to this, I'll try and keep this as PG as I can, but we're talking about killing somebody by over 13 hours, pouring 5 ounces at a time boiling water down their throat, while being raped, skinning them alive but keeping them alive, severing arms but stopping the bleeding. Violent, vicious stuff in Africa that we have seen. MS-13, they'll do this. And so, unfortunately, what we have found, and I want to ask you this about Lucky later, once they're in, they don't get out. It's very rare that they get out, right? And so, MS-13, can you scroll? So the Crips, of course, we understand the Crips. Let's keep it. This is just a general Google search because I didn't want to go, and it's interesting. I knew about this one. Nazi Party, as a gang. The Bloods, keep scrolling. And I want to do a general search of Mexican Mafia, Yakuza. And then if you don't mind, pull up the top Mexican gangs at the moment, Rebecca, as you're diving into this, Jared. Your experience, what happens to a human being to get into these gangs and then commit these acts that I believe in your right mind you could never do, no human being could do, because it's demonic. So have you learned anything from these documentaries?
I think one of the things I would say is the premise, and I think it's just as true for a gang as it is for a beautiful, traditional, well-rounded American family, like a Norman Rockwell picture. Hurting people hurt others. And
hurt people hurt people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Hurt people hurt other people. And the level of which you have been hurt has a big impact on the level of pain that you allow to flow out of you as you begin to try to escalate the violence in order to protect who you are on the inside. Like, we know that anger is nearly always a secondary emotion, nearly always projected because of the grief that we're experiencing that feels unbearable. And so anger puts us in a place of feeling control, which is a lot more comforting to be angry than it is to be grieving, because when you're angry, you're projecting bigness and all of those things. So I want to say, like, that's probably the foundational aspect there that I see things moving from. For me, everything that I knew about gangs, I knew that I only knew because of what I'd seen in media. And so as I began to go into this project with no real intentionality of, it wasn't my idea, basically, things just began to develop. And, you know, that's one of the wonderful things about filmmaking with documentaries is you don't always know.
It's a discovery.
It's a discovery. So, it keeps on going. And so Lucky invited me to come stay with a Black Power gang. And they were going to be staying in a marae, which is a Māori meeting house. And I said to Lucky, well, I've never stayed in a marae before. I'm Pākehā, I'm white.
Yes. You don't get to invite it into
and so he said, well, this is a good time for you to come. And I said, okay, well, where will Black Power stay? And he said, they'll stay in the marae. And I said, okay, let's backtrack. Where will I stay? And he said, in the marae. I said, okay, so no, you're confusing me here because you keep saying that I'm going to be in the same room with Black Power. Have you not noticed that I'm white? And he said, no, you're coming and you're going to stay with Black Power. And what we're going to do is we're going to sit around. And I have 3 days with this gang because they've invited me to come bring healing to them. And I'm going to get them to open up on the first night their trauma. And you'll have to share your trauma too, whatever is the most relevant trauma in your life, so that you're equal with them. You need to make yourself vulnerable.
That's what Lucky's telling you.
Yeah, you have
you've got to come vulnerable too.
You've got to come vulnerable too. And if you have cameramen there, they all have to share. Everybody is going to have their turn bringing their hurt into the middle of the room. And so I come into this environment nervous as you can be, with no gang affiliation. And now I'm a white person in a Black Power meeting, in a Māori meeting house. I'm so outside my comfort zone. And I have traveled all around the world. This was the first time I'd ever experienced proper culture shock, and I was in my own country. And I've pastored people, so I've heard a lot of, horrendous stories on a one-on-one basis. This time, I'm in a room with gang members who almost echoed each other's story, where they went around the circle and they all pretty much said the same thing. I've never shared this before out loud in my life.
Because culturally, it's not okay.
That's right.
It's not okay. Becca, can you pull up, just pull up Maori Warrior. M-A-U-R-I, Maori Warrior. Just pull it up. I want Americans, I want to bring in, look, it's like a history lesson here. Let's dive into, like our Native Americans, but the Maoris, they're such a proud people. And good night, massive human beings.
If they didn't have a high-pitched laugh, then they'd be horrific.
No, look, but they're like teddy bears, right? I mean, they're so loving, but I played in the era of Jonah Lomo, and I played professional rugby, and I played against them. And I'm telling you, you get hit by a Maori, it's like getting hit by a truck. I mean, they're just massive human beings, physical human beings, and but so proud, such tribal customs. Can you click on that picture of the Maori guys, the guy with the oar? That's it. Right? Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. the tribal markings, the tattoos, everything has significance. I'll never forget, Mike Tyson gets a Maori tattoo on his face, and people go, dude, what are you doing? And I go, there's so much history that I wouldn't even dare. Because for me, it's about honor. Everything's about honor, even if it's in a gang. Mm-hmm. So surely you felt the brotherhood.
Absolutely.
The honor.
The honor. And so this is what really threw me, is they all began to share, this is how old I was when I was molested or raped. I've never said this before out loud.
How many of them?
So that was a small gang meeting. There were about 14, 15 gang members. Mm-hmm. I think 12 of them
shared about
being molested.
And I want to pause you there.
Yeah.
That is the direct connection between sex trafficking and gangs, sex trafficking and any other form of violence. That's why you cannot separate sex trafficking from any other crime, because all other crime somewhere has sexual abuse in it. It's in there. Mm-hmm. Something breaks in a human being. And I did not talk to you about this before, but I knew we were going to get here. That's why I asked you, what happens to a human being to be willing to do something like that? And it's almost like Satan understands that the kryptonite to humanity is sexual brokenness. And once a person goes there, then they're going to long for community.
Yeah.
And whichever community takes them in first, they will become that.
Yeah.
And if it happens to be a gang, there's no end.
Yeah.
There's no end to where that could lead. Yeah. That's my experience. So you say, over 80%.
Yeah, over 80%.
Wow.
And what is unique in that with the gangs and working with Lucky and some of the gangs is they say, churches will turn us away, but a gang will never turn us away.
Yep.
A church is meant to love and accept and help the most broken, but they so often are uncomfortable or uncertain or don't know how to respond. But a gang is, they'll always be telling me, we will never turn somebody away because they're too broken. We'll come around them and we will love them. We will be family to them. And when they mess up over and over and over, they won't stop being our family.
So that's called functional dysfunction.
Yeah.
Within their dysfunction of committing crime and doing whatever, there's actual real love in there. There's
phenomenal love.
Community.
Yeah. So I came away from my first few times feeling very confronted and very challenged from my own heart as a pastor to how well am I actually loving people.
Did they accept you in the process? Were there some members? I mean, surely the tension in the room must have been thick.
Oh, the tension was thick, and they were very apprehensive because there's a high distrust for media, high distrust.
Sure. And frankly, also for the white guy.
Yeah. But by the end of the 3 days, there was a real camaraderie and a real brotherhood that had been built. And that has continued to the point where I have genuine friendship with some of these men. That has gone beyond the project. Men who are so determined to leave a different legacy to the one that they inherited, that they are making very drastic, very hard, radical changes around their life and having supernatural encounters with Jesus. So I interviewed a man called Brother H, who was the leader of the Whakatane Black Power Gang, motorcycle gangsters. Okay, that's the name of the town for all the Americans in New Zealand.
North or South Island?
North Island.
I want to be, okay. So he's the leader.
He's the leader of this particular chapter. And I asked him a question. I said, tell me about Jesus. Because they've brought Lucky in because they know he's had an encounter with God, and Māori people are inherently very spiritual people.
They are, absolutely.
And so they know that he has had a connection with God.
As is most indigenous people.
And so I go, well, you're seeking something, otherwise you wouldn't have brought Lucky in. So tell me, who is Jesus to you? And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, well, I don't know how to answer who is Jesus, but let me tell you this. My wife was a meth addict, and she was an addict for years, and nothing I could do would help her. One day in her room alone, she had an encounter with God. God spoke to her and took her to rehab, and she came back healed. Now I cannot escape the question, who is this Jesus that could do something for my wife that I never could do? And so we began to follow his story. 18 months later, he's sitting with the gang members as the leader, telling them, guys, you have watched my life. Everything we've heard about Jesus is true. He's real. I am praying every day. I read a Bible, and I'm praying for you guys every day. Everything that we've been told about Jesus is true. And it's
because there was an encounter.
An encounter.
And I say this, what does it take for a man to position himself in right alignment with God? The man has to come to the end of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why some people, my father, 27 years struggle with alcohol, could never admit he was an alcoholic. And he had lows. I mean, you're saying, this is rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's another 5 levels below this.
Wow.
And for some people, it's one run-in with the law, and that's their rock bottom.
Yes.
And I always measure a guy that has tenacity, like Paul. Saul, who became Paul in the Bible, the one who was in the Sanhedrin, who persecuted Christians, who burnt them by the stake, who hunted Christians. That guy, who then turned and said, wait a minute, this is the Messiah.
Yeah.
I was wrong. It writes half the New Testament. So when I look at the measure of a man and I go, this guy is defying God at levels, been in prison 5 times, lost his family, and he's still fighting. I know when we flip that guy.
Oh, yeah. He's a weapon.
Oh, my goodness. Versus the guy whose depth is so shallow that the first level of resistance, and look, salvation. I'm very thankful for it. But there are different kinds of warriors on this planet. And a Lucky, with all his experience, when you flip that guy, he's going to take 1 million with him.
Yeah. So he was interesting to me as someone who's pastored for years. And I was watching how many people he was sharing the gospel with while still being a real diamond in the rough himself.
Yeah.
Still processing through his baggage. And I said, God, I remember going home saying, God, isn't this a little bit dangerous to have someone with so much influence, with so little history with you?
Be your ambassador.
Yeah.
Right.
And I said, God, what are you?
Where's his seminary degree?
Yeah.
How was he qualified? He's qualified because he met me.
Yeah. And so Jesus said to me, Jared, you want people to talk about me when they get saved? And I said, I do. And he said, clearly you think there's a number though before it becomes unsafe.
Sure. There's a level. There's a qualification.
And he said to me, so Jared, seeing as you're so educated, you tell me, what's the number? And I was so humbled, I just sat down and shut up. Yeah. But you talk about people being a fighter. We met this guy, Jesse, who is in the mongrel mob. So we've got Black Power on one side, and we've got mongrel mob on the other. And for people who don't understand New Zealand gangs, the rivalry is like the rivalry between the Bloods and the Crips.
No, it's fierce. But just when you say blacks, because again, speaking to the American, technically I'm an African American. Yeah. Black Americans, when you speak black, help Americans understand the Maoris, because they'll look at a Maori and go, well, wait a minute, they're not black, or they'll look at you to just help draw some lines for us here in New Zealand. So for the American listener and viewer, that they understand what we say here.
Yeah. So a Māori who is a part of so the mongrel mob are predominantly still made up of Māoris, both parties.
Yeah.
So they picked right at the start when the gangs began to form, and the gangs formed out of the boys' homes. So there was
in the Maori culture.
So the
indigenous people.
There was pretty much a stolen generation.
Yeah.
Where the government came in, collected up a whole lot of the boys that were in broken homes or homes that weren't running within a Western mindset, and they put them together in orphanages. And there was a high degree of molestation from the government caregivers to the boys.
We look at Australia's history. We look at
And so when these boys grew out of the boys' homes, they formed these two gangs, the mongrel mob and the Black Power. And so both are Māoris. Both you're looking at, well, you're not black, you're brown. But they were the names that they ascribed to themselves.
And I want to do that so people understand when they see this, because again, we make everything in this culture today skin pigment.
Sure.
And this defies that again. It's got nothing to do with skin pigment.
That's right.
This is a name, and so here we go.
And so I was interviewing a man called Jesse in the mongrel mob headquarters. And he said to me, are you really a pastor? And I said, I am. And he leaned forward and said, I'm a Christian. I thought, you've got a story here. And so he told me a story. Later on, I came back into the headquarters and recorded it, but this was his story. And so he said, I hated Christians with a fierce passion. And he was a mongrel mob member, but he was also a cage fighter. And so he said, whenever I'd have a fight coming up and I knew the person was a Christian, I would go extra effort into praying to my different gods of war because I hated Christians with an ultimate passion.
And if you can, I'm sidebarring you, but don't lose your train of thought. Talk to me just a little bit of the indigenous, like we can talk about the natives in Hawaii, okay? And a friend of mine's a great-grandfather united the Hawaii Islands.
Wow.
Okay? So they pray to certain gods.
Yes.
Indigenous Maori people, what would be a belief system? What would they pray to?
So they have a variety of gods under one chief god. And so they have different gods they pray to for different purposes.
For different things.
Different things.
Yeah.
And incredible tribal people. So New Zealand, the tribes weren't united. There were Māori tribes that were cannibals. There were Māori tribes that were warriors. There were tribes that were peaceful farmers. There were ones that were slave runners. So they've got a very rich and complex history. So you have this Māori man who's a cage fighter fighting a man called the Preacher, who he knew was a Christian. And he said, I got into the ring and I see this man and I hated him. And I began praying to my Māori gods that they would give me victory over this man. And the fight began and I was dominating him. But he said, then something happened in the fight, momentum shifted, and he got the upper hand. And then for the first time in my career, I was knocked unconscious. He said, and it was a big knockout. He was in and out of consciousness for about a quarter of an hour before he was finally, with it. And he said, I had no idea what it was that I saw when I was unconscious, or that I knew that God was real and I had met him. Jump forward a year, he's had an encounter.
I love God.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just telling you, I will put you in a cage, get you knocked unconscious, and then in the middle of coming out of consciousness, no big deal, you'll just meet Jesus.
So and I love the fact that he's fighting a guy called the Preacher.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to give you the word of God, but physically.
And I'm coming with my Maori gods.
Yeah. And so he has this revelation that God is real, but he has no memory of what he saw. Transpires, he ends up over the course of a year giving his life to Jesus. He's in church and he takes communion. When he takes communion, his memory is instantly restored. And he said, when I had the communion, I remembered, it was like, popped straight back. I saw myself, I was outside of my body.
Yep. And that has happened to me.
Right.
It's a very interesting experience.
Sure, I bet. So he goes, I'm outside of my body. And I see Jesus come standing over me, and he has holes in his hands, and blood is pouring out of his hands, and he's covering my body in his blood. And I'm getting this interview in the gang headquarters, and so then he leans forward and goes, "Yeah, so I'm a Christian now." I'm just like, the biggest understatement.
Yeah, and then you almost challenge anybody in the gang and go, refute that.
Yeah.
Why? Because in this book that I live by, he says they will know me by the word of your testimony.
Yeah.
So when Lucky speaks and Lucky says, or when Jesse, right, speaks and says, listen, I fight the Preacher. Yeah, Jesse, we know you. We saw you fight. I get knocked unconscious. We saw it. Let me tell you what happened. Who refutes that?
Yeah.
You can't. It's a man's personal encounter.
Absolutely. So my question to him was, okay, so because he went on to say, look, I've now been baptized in the Holy Spirit and I've had deliverance. And I've been set free from depression that has plagued me a big part of my life. So I said, okay, Jesse, we're in the Mongrel Mob headquarters. You're a Christian. You've been filled with the presence of God. You've been set free. Why are you still a gang member?
Mm-hmm.
And he said this was really interesting. He said, this gang took me in when I was in my darkest. Now that I've found the light, should I abandon them? If I cannot be Jesus to my brothers, who can be?
Come on.
And it was such an interesting shift of my thinking of, get saved and then, leave the gang so you can have a better life. He said, no, these brothers, they are my life. They are my family.
Okay, but think about this now. Think about what you're saying, Jared. And while we do, can you pull something up for me, Rebecca? I want you to type in New Zealand Haka, HKA, versus South Africa, okay?
Oh, yeah, come on.
Yeah, and I want people to know, I want to just bestow honor. And I faced this thing. It's a war cry. And in the Haka, the conventional Haka, they basically challenge you to war and to give your life. I mean, it's the honor in that.
Oh, I've sat in front of the Mongrel Mob and the Black Power, who both have their own Hakas.
Yeah, and there's multiple versions of the Haka.
Multiple versions. Many versions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jesus calls a couple boys, unqualified, and he always does. I will equip the called. He doesn't call the equipped. So whenever we think we got it and we're smart, and he goes, okay, well, let me raise someone up that really knows nothing and do something profound. So he calls these boys up. He elevates their lifestyle. They go from mere fishermen, and all of a sudden now they're walking with the Messiah that was foretold. So it's like we're the chosen, right? No pun intended, Dallas Jenkins. You've got a great TV series, but we are the chosen, right? And then he goes, now let's go eat with Zacchaeus. Let's go eat with the sinners. And they go, whoa. We came from that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Why now we need to go eat with the Sanhedrin? And that's Jesse saying, would I now leave these people who took me in? Now that I know, wouldn't I now stay with them? Of course. This past week. Just see if we're flying by the seat of our pants. Yeah, let's play it. Let's play it.
2019. So we probably won this game.
That's not good. Because we just beat you this past Saturday, and I think we're going to beat you again. But I want people just to see this. Just play it, and we're going to bring it in later. And come on. We have to understand God made so many different people. And these cultures are so rich for us to learn from.
Yeah.
And here's a guy saying, hey, I'm saved, baptized in the Holy Spirit. Just watch this. I'll just be quiet. I'll shut up. Just watch this. When they do this, they do it for their families, for their legacy. And then we face them. And I faced that on the field. And they've switched recently, the All Blacks have switched to this haka. And they'll do different ones. But I want people to see it. To understand what we're talking about. This is during the World Cup, of course.
To do a haka in front of your nation is probably the most honourable thing that could ever happen in your life as a New Zealander.
This used to be my life, man. Rugby was... At one point, I probably served rugby as hard as I served God. Becca, pull up one more. Pull up South Africa versus All Blacks this past weekend. In South Africa, of course, we got the Impis, and that's our heritage. Is our natives are the black tribes, and the Zulus, and Shaka Zulu, and the Impis, and those were warriors too.
Yeah.
And then there's that culture. And so what I hear you say as you dive in this, how many documentaries have you made now?
Oh, wow. This will be our first feature-length one. From our little shorts to our half-hour specials, I think we've done about 65 in the last 2 years.
Wow. And most of them gang-related, right?
A lot of it gang-related, but a lot of it not.
Sure.
But this film, I've never worked on something that has shaped me and challenged me so much.
What do you call it?
It's called Mana Atua.
Mana Atua.
So mana is a Māori word that means honor, respect, power, authority, dignity. And Atua is the indigenous word for God. And so it flows up that we honor God, but then it flows back that he bestows mana onto us. And so that's actually the name that Lucky Takuha requested.
Yeah, it's just interesting that manna is from heaven. God bestowed manna upon Israel when Israel obeyed in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because our background, our relationship with New Zealand as a nation, South Africa, it's 101 years now, is our healthy rivalry.
Wow.
The war now in rugby. In rugby, it's like the gladiator games of times. It's the expression of a culture.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Becca's got the right thing, but pull up the South African anthem of this past weekend. And you're watching 90,000 South Africans who's living in a nation, there's so much crime. 4 countries are our borders. There's no border. There's so much crime. Poverty. There's incredible stuff. And I watched firsthand in 1994 going to 1995. We won the World Cup, of course, with Francois Pienaar. And you you saw a nation galvanized together on the brink of civil war. I had to do military service that year. On the brink of civil war, singing an anthem, black, white, together, where they changed our national anthem now into 3 languages because it used to just be Afrikaans 1. Learning a new language, a new flag, completely, historical change in the nation, and it glued a nation together. My phone rang off the hook.
Wow.
This past weekend because it happened again. It happened in 1994, and South Africa's going through a really, really tough time at the moment with crime and drought and just bad stuff. This weekend, something happened, and it's almost always when New Zealand is present. There's something between those two nations that I believe God does something. It was with the All Blacks in the mid-90s when we won the World Cup.
Yeah.
And it was a moment. In a matter of 5 minutes, God changed the nation. That happened again this weekend. You should read the reports of South Africans saying, we're back. Not rugby. We as a nation, we can endure. We can fight. God is our center. In God we trust. I mean, it's unbelievable when you bring people together and a tribal aspect is allowed to be featured. It galvanizes people. Just play a little bit of this. Just a little bit. Yeah. And you can't hear it in studio, but deafening how 90,000 people just glued together. Black, white, cultural differences, doesn't matter. And God just reshapes a nation. This is this past weekend, of course, 2022, again, against the All Blacks. And it's just no coincidence that those two nations are linked, I believe. I really believe they are. We'll just do another minute of this. And the audience in the back is it's unbelievable. Of course, South Africans also very big people, very big guys. Thanks, Rebecca.
If you want, at some point, I could show you a clip from our upcoming film.
Can we pull it up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, tell Rebecca how to pull it up.
So, Rebecca, just go on to fantailstudios.com, hit the Fantail TV tab in the top right, and scroll down. There's our shows. Mana Atua, that's Lucky there. Top left now.
Click on Lucky.
That's the man.
Yep.
And then just pick their video, scroll down.
Dan, can you be on this shot on the screen?
Pick the one in the middle, the one where it's Mana Atua, and we can watch that if you want to.
Yeah, let's play it. You won't hear it here, but the audience will hear it. Yeah. Skip. Yeah, let's watch this.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Once Were Warriors, but it looked like a pretty normal family to me. My life was foster homes, youth prison,
we'll go about halfway through, and I want to encourage the audience to go to Fantail Studios and go watch this.
But most of all,
so just jump into the middle if you want to.
Just skip forward. Yeah, there we go.
Trying to.
That's Lucky.
That's Brother H.
That's Brother.
Talking about earlier.
That's Brother H. Okay.
You know, all that bad shit.
Not only are these gangs opening themselves up, but out of respect for a shared belief, I've been given the opportunity to help out and bridge the gap between the police and the clubs.
This is where Lucky went to the police. Just skip forward a little bit. That's Lucky there, and when he went to speak to the police about how God changed his life through that encounter with the policeman.
I recognise that many of the people that I'm dealing with are just products of the upbringings that they've had, of the systems that they've been discarded by, often abused by. We get called to go into dark places to rescue.
Lucky's lived a lot of life.
At this event, that detective asked for forgiveness on behalf of the police for how Lucky had been mistreated as a child. And then Lucky cried on the stage when he received that healing.
Yeah, but that's how you galvanize a whole Maori culture back with the police. And we talk about policing, community policing in the US, and how you restore relationships with the policing community.
Humility.
It's always humility and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Repentance and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Those are the two keys that destroy Satan in any culture.
So the detective hopped on his knees in front of an entire conference of police and asked for Lucky's forgiveness.
Thank you, Rebecca. Tell me, if we can. I want to do more of these. I want to dive in and see how we can do. There's a project you're about to work on that I think we really can support you in, and it's got to do with trafficking. Fantail Studios, Lucky Story. I even just say to Americans, sometimes for a while, I've had a friend that have done this. You gotta walk on someone else's testimony a little bit until you have your own.
Yeah.
Right. And so for those who I don't know how to prove that God is powerful, whatever, tell Lucky's story.
Yeah.
Go dive in there and tell Lucky's story. Tell people, hey man, I don't know. All I can tell you is a way I can show you that God can change people. There's this guy called Lucky from New Zealand, gang member. And then people will discover, they'll have their encounter with God and they'll be able to have their own testimony.
Absolutely.
It's so powerful. Jared, tell me where people can find you. Tell me how we can support you. And thank you for your time here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to find us is just fantailstudios.com, FANTAIL, studios.com. All of our shows are available to watch there. We are crowdfunded, so if people want to support us financially, then they can do that via the website as well. And but the main thing that we want is people just to be watching the videos, sharing them with their friends so that people can have their own encounters.
Key takeaway here from the bottom line is this: sexual brokenness sets a life on a path of destruction.
Yeah.
It is so difficult, and it's a common denominator: sexual brokenness and fatherlessness.
Yeah.
And I didn't ask you about that, but probably a lot of these boys also fatherless.
Oh, they've got an amazing story in prison where the prison guards provided Mother's Day cards for everyone to write to their mums in prison on Mother's Day. And it was a big hit. They went to do it on Father's Day, and I think 3 cards got taken.
Yeah. And that is New Zealand. 80% of incarcerated people in our county jail where I'm sitting in Irving, Texas today, 80% of them are fatherless and have now left their children fatherless. And it's generational. So you'll find sexual brokenness and fatherlessness. We fix those 2 things.
That's it.
And a lot will be better in this world.
Yeah.
God bless you, Jared.
Hey, thank you so much.
Appreciate you, man.
Cheers.
Talk to you guys next time.